Hi there. It's April 28th and we continue our journey through the good news of Luke. We're in chapter 23, verse 44, and we're reading through to chapter 24 and verse 12. The end of chapter 23 deals with the rest of the story of the crucifixion of Jesus. About the 6th hour, about midday, darkness comes across the land, and it's supernatural darkness that lasts for 3 hours. The veil of the temple, the separation between God and man that has been there to keep man out of God's presence, is torn, a real picture of what's going on in Jesus' death. He is removing the separation, he's removing the veil. And then Jesus cries out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." And he dies. And the centurion who's been looking after him, this is a hardened Roman soldier, a man who would have been used to seeing executions. He says this really was an innocent man. This really was a just man. And it says that all those who were watching went away beating their breasts. And the women also who had accompanied Jesus, just the women are left. The men have disappeared, but the women are still there. And they are hanging around to see what happens now. Traditionally, crucified bodies were just thrown on a rubbish heap. There was no special treatment given to them. But one member of the council, a Jew from a Judean Jew called Joseph of Arimathea, goes and asks Pilate if he can have the body, because it's coming up for the special Sabbath of the Passover, and bodies are not to be allowed to be left hanging over that time. And Joseph is granted the body, and so he lays it in his own tomb. There's no account with Luke of stories of placing guards on the tomb. That's not to doubt that they happened, but Luke is interested in the people stuff, what's going on among these people who are caring for Jesus, and particularly among the women. And the women see where he's been laid, and then they go off to get spices, what the Greek calls aromata, and they're going to bring them back. They're going to anoint his body and try and give him something of a decent burial, having been through so much. But when they come back at the beginning of chapter 24, they find the stone rolled away and the tomb empty. And as they turn around, they see two men there, and the men are saying, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" Well, they're so worried, they're so scared, they fall down. They're tremendously overpowered by fear. But these men are encouraging them, saying, if Jesus has fulfilled what he told you he would do, don't you remember that he said he would be crucified and then he would rise again the third day? And then it says they remembered what Jesus had said. And they go back then and tell the men, who are presumably cowering, who have got back together, and they tell the men what has happened. But the men, being men, just dismiss what the women have said as being silly tittle-tattle women's talk, and just dismiss it, except for the last little phrase where Peter, I don't know if he slips out on his own unnoticed, but he wants to see if what they say is true. So he goes to the tomb and he finds it as they said, but he's puzzled, it says, and he goes home perplexed. They just haven't really connected yet. The penny hasn't dropped. The tremendous thing is, of course, that Jesus overcomes death. He breaks out of the tomb. The messengers of heaven, these angelic beings, these young men, are coming to announce to the women primarily what Jesus has done. It's interesting that we see here this great news, this amazing news entrusted to the women. This says something about God's order of things, that it's not man, woman, and then the rest. It's actually that God entrusts men and women with the powerful news of the breaking out of death of Jesus. So let's today not be afraid to tell whoever we are, male, female, whatever situation we find ourselves in, the good news that Jesus is not in the tomb, he's risen from the dead. Have a very good April 28th.